I'm excited to welcome our next guest, who will be making his RIZIN debut on May 10th at RIZIN.53 in Kobe against Koyomi Matsushima, the CFFC champion Ryan Cafaro. Ryan, thank you for your time today, and it is a pleasure to meet you.
Thank you very much for having me. I'm ecstatic to be here.
So before we talk about your debut, which of course the fans are very much looking forward to, I want to get to know more about you, both as a fighter and as a person. Tell me how and why you started doing martial arts to begin with.
Well, let's see. This wasn't really the reason I started, but I did Tang Sudo when I was like 7 years old. I guess more of like an artistic form of Taekwondo. I did it for probably 6 months and never really thought anything of it, but it definitely set the fundamentals for my martial arts journey. And then when I was in high school, I definitely went through a phase of being bullied a little bit, and I started lifting weights and wrestling. And then I saw an MMA fight on TV, and then I just was immediately, captivated by that. And I just thought, whatever this sport is, this is what I want to do for the rest of my life. And I saw that at 17 years old, and I've never looked back.
Wow. And I guess why did you decide to do weight training and wrestling specifically as a way to, as a response to the bullying in high school?
I mean, it just was like I was weak. I was skinny. I had tried wrestling in middle school before high school and just flopped around on the mat and didn't know what to do and didn't take anything serious. I did one training session and was really sore after. And I thought, why would anyone want to feel like this? I don't want to do this. So it was just sort of like I guess it was a bit of just sort of giving into like just feeling, fueling myself through anger at the time. And then ultimately using it to discover my passion for fighting, because I just felt I could stand up for myself if I was stronger, and if I could. And then once I realized that you can lift weights, but that doesn't help you if you can't compete from a combat sports standpoint. And then that's when I realized that the kids who were wrestlers, they never got bullied because they could beat up anybody. And then I was like, all right, I want to do that as well. And then that's where it kind of rolled.
And up until you started doing wrestling and weight training, did you keep up with martial arts, or you just kind of quit halfway through, or you kept?
No, I quit at when I was 7 years old and didn't do anything. I ran cross country in high school, and both my parents are classical musicians. They both graduated from the Juilliard School of Music. And my mother is the head of piano faculty at the Curtis Institute of Music in Philadelphia, and my father was a cellist for the Philadelphia Orchestra. So I was actually on the path of a musician. I played clarinet for 6 years. I played bass guitar for several years. I played cello, played piano, and ultimately none of that panned out because I fell in love with fighting.
Wow. So you were doing all of that up until you started doing wrestling.
Yeah. So I was kind of like, I was definitely more of like the band geek sort of thing, and definitely went through that, sort of phase of my life. Because, my mother ran a music camp called the Hartwood College Summer Music Festival for years and years. And every summer I would go to band camp. And that was basically where I, started doing a lot of my music stuff. But then ultimately, it was funny because I remember being there one year and I was super, super excited to see Ken Shamrock fight Tito Ortiz. So it's like, I was like, I figure out how to order a pay-per-view. What's a pay-per-view? When I was like, 14 years old. So, even before I had seen stuff and thought it was interesting, but.
Wow, that is really interesting. And so when you started doing wrestling, were you a natural? Did you take to it pretty quick, or it's something you had to work towards?
No, I was terrible. So to give you an idea, there's junior varsity, and then we're in the state of New Jersey. New Jersey is one of the toughest states in America for wrestling, and so I started wrestling my sophomore year, so I was well behind everybody. I had a record of 4-8 on JV. And then the next year, my junior year, I had a record of 19-3 on JV, and I won 2 varsity matches. And then my senior year, I went like 15-15 on varsity, but I upset somebody and I managed to take 3rd place in districts and qualify for regions, which is before states. In the grand scheme of things, it's not very impressive, but for me, placing in districts was like a very, something that I could be proud of, like a real big feather in my cap. And I feel like that kind of set the set the wheels in motion for what I was going to do in the future. And I even wrestled in junior college a little bit as well, which
Wow.
I absolutely abysmally. But wrestling in college, you take away certain things from a college wrestling practice when you're in there just getting mauled by, everybody who wrestles in college is good. There is nobody who is, an idiot. Like in high school, you run into a couple goofballs whose parents force them to. Nobody forces you to college wrestle. So everybody there is good, even if they're quote unquote a bad college wrestler.
Which JUCO did you wrestle at?
It's a school called Gloucester County College. And now it is called Gloucester Rowan University at Gloucester. So it's on the East Coast. I commuted there, and that's where I got my my associate's degree before I transferred to Rowan full time to get my bachelor's degree in health promotion and fitness management. It's a branch of exercise science.
Wow. And for the wrestling team in the JUCO, did you walk on or were you recruited?
No, I walked on, and again, I had a horrible record, but I didn't get pinned very much. I was tough. I didn't give up a lot. So
I see. And just to rewind a little bit, you said you watched an MMA fight or you watched something on TV when you were in high school.
Yeah.
Which do you remember which event that was?
So it was I was watching Spike TV in my mom's kitchen, and I remember Evan Tanner was fighting David Loazo, and I remember it specifically that I thought, oh, cool, some guy's doing wrestling, and then David Loazo reversed the position and elbowed Evan Tanner into oblivion and won the fight via cuts, plural, multiple cuts.
Wow.
And I saw that, I was like, this is awesome. Sign me up.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's crazy. Did you get to watch any other big MMA shows at the time, or it was just the UFC?
So I had watched that, but then when I went on YouTube, I was at the I've said this in a couple interviews before, but I grew up in the age of commenting on the ShareDog forums. So I was I was the guy who would talk about like who's better from Pride or UFC, and they'd be like, "Oh, have you heard about these guys in Japan? Have you seen all the rules where you can soccer kick and you can knee?" And I was like, "What is this?" And then it's cool seeing I'm excited. Our American champion Chuck Liddell. Oh, and then he gets beat in Japan, and I'm like, "Whoa! Like what's going on here?" And then you just realize the level of combat sports globally. And then, I fell in love with watching, the RIZIN fights, the Shogun Huas, the Dan Hendos, Vanderlei Silvas, and then even some of the guys that I really loved, like one of the first guys who really inspired me was Genki Sudo.
Wow.
Yeah, Genki Sudo, because I remember there was a highlight reel of him on YouTube, and I remember he was submitting everybody. It took me probably like 5 years before I even realized what a calf crusher was, when Genki was getting a rolling calf crusher in tournaments. And I was like, I replayed it so many times. I'm like, what did he tap him with? I don't know. But like a lot of the Japanese icons I followed, Rumita Sato, Hayato Sakurai, like some of the real OGs of the Japanese MMA scene. Because you never seen anybody hit a 6-second flying armbar like Rumita Sato, or hitting crazy spinning wheel kicks like Hayato Mox Sakurai. Their shorts were just so cool too. So yeah, just everything about like the just the aesthetic of Japanese MMA, especially like in that age, was so cool.
No, that's awesome. I guess when did you start being one of these regulars in the ShareDog forums? That was all in high school?
Yeah, definitely. Yep. It started in high school. I obviously I can't remember my account now. It's been, decades at this point, but it was it was funny. I would argue about like, I think that this guy's going to make it to the UFC, or I don't know if this guy's style would handle it in Pride, etc. So, it was an interesting time for sure.
And was it around that time that you started doing jiu-jitsu? Because I read that you had begun jiu-jitsu after wrestling.
So I started jiu-jitsu, I believe, around my senior year of high school. So there's a chain of martial arts gyms on the East Coast called Tiger Schulman's. They've produced Lyman Good, Julio Arce, Shane Burgos, some really elite fighters. And it's kind of like a lot of people would make fun of them being like McDojos, but in the sense of there's so many of them that they could, and they have a headquarters up in like North Jersey near New York, so they could always draw from all of these different gyms to find elite talent. it kind of reminds me of like how the Chinese national team finds their elite weightlifters. Like they attend every elementary school and then test each student to see who could be a promising weightlifter, sort of thing. So so I started at a Tiger Schulman's, just regular gym. And so my first introduction into jiu-jitsu was through that school, but it was also learning jiu-jitsu for an MMA standpoint. So I was learning, moves, but moves to, hey, you can't just sit here with this. You have to avoid strikes. Whereas, jiu-jitsu nowadays is such a purebred sport. It's completely different. The things that you can get away with. I'm doing jiu-jitsu sometimes and somebody rolls underneath me. And now I'm like, you do that, I'm going to stomp you in the head. So.
Wow. And so if you started your senior year of high school, what year would that have been? 07?
2000. I graduated in 2008. So yeah.
Okay. And what belt are you at this point?
So I was a blue belt for 11 years. And I just became a purple belt after I won the Art of War belt. I submitted a guy named Matt Turnbull, and he's now a jiu-jitsu black belt. And right before I fought him, I had submitted a jiu-jitsu black belt named Jeremiah Labiano, who has competed in combat jiu-jitsu as an elite black belt. And I submitted him as well. And it's pretty funny too, because now that was for when I won the Art of War title. And then when I lost the Art of War title, Matt Turnbull and I became friends, and I actually helped him win the Art of War title against the guy that beat me.
Wow.
And then he's actually coming with me and coaching me in Japan. So it's become like very like fun full circle thing where we hated each other for 3 months and now we're like best friends. And I need someone to come with me to Japan for 2 weeks, and he's like, I'm in.
That is awesome. And I read, correct me if I'm wrong, but I read that the guillotine is like your go-to submission.
Yes. Yeah. There's no hiding that. Matsushima can figure that out one pretty quickly just looking at my record. I think I have 6 or 7 wins by submission, all by guillotine and maybe 1 ninja choke.
Wow. I guess, why were you a blue belt for 11 years? Is it just because you didn't want to get the progression? Or?
I would just say I didn't attend a lot of gi classes. I wasn't really at a particular jiu-jitsu school for a extended period of time. A lot of it was just like MMA training or jiu-jitsu for MMA. So I never really went through the traditional sit down, do your classes, receive your stripes, go through the progression. So in that sense, I feel like there were holes in my jiu-jitsu game, and I relied way too much on my go-to move, which was the guillotine. I've won and lost fights because of that, going for it, squeezing it too hard, burning myself out, losing position. And it's taken me a long time and a lot of humbling and practice to make sure that isn't really an issue in my style anymore. I don't bank on the guillotine as heavily as I used to, but it's always a weapon. So if you sleep on it, I'll still catch you.
What is it specifically about the guillotine that makes it like your favorite submission?
So I got put out cold with one in my second amateur fight in like 2009. And then after that, I won my first fight with a guillotine too in 2009. So, and I think it translated from in high school, I used to throw a left-sided headlock. So it's interesting that most right-handed wrestlers wrestle from like a southpaw position with the right leg forward. But because I did Tang Soo Do, I wrestled from a left leg stance. So I was considered like unorthodox. And so because of that, my headlock, when I threw it with my left arm on that side, it was a lot stronger, and it caught people off guard because they weren't used to seeing wrestlers in that stance that often. So I was like the southpaw of wrestling, basically. And then, and I feel like just the squeeze I developed from that helped me develop my squeeze for the guillotine. And they both have kind of like a similar finishing mechanism of like just basically crushing someone's head.
And did you also have a professional MMA Muay Thai fight at some point?
Yes. So I actually have. So this is funny too. After I lost my first professional title fight, probably in 2018 or 27, I think 2018. I got out wrestled pretty hard in that fight, and I was frustrated. And then I got offered to fight in a Class A Muay Thai fight, which is technically an amateur fight, but I had 10 pro MMA fights at the time. And I said, I'm not going to do this because I'm going to get in trouble and get banned from combat sports. And then the New Jersey State Athletic Commissioner said it was fine. And I actually demanded to speak to him on the phone to ensure that I would not get in trouble for taking a technically an amateur Muay Thai fight. But it was the rules were basically full rules Muay Thai with just elbow pads. So that's what Class A was in America. I TKO'd some guy pretty nasty in the second round. And then after that, I said, I'm not doing this anymore. Like, let's go pro. So then I ended up fighting a professional Muay Thai fighter named Ethan Geffen in his hometown in Madison Square Garden at the Hulu Theater, like the smaller theater where like Vasyl Lomachenko has fought before. And I ended up beating him by split decision. And then we actually rematched in California a few years later. And I lost to him by a close decision in that fight as well. So I have two pro Muay Thai fights and one amateur Muay Thai fight.
Wow. That's really interesting, especially after having so many professional MMA fights.
Yeah.
So just to kind of get the timeline straight. So your first amateur fight was June 6, 2009. Is that correct?
Correct.
And were you in college at the time when you had this amateur MMA fight?
Yes, I had just started college.
I guess what was the like, obviously you had been doing wrestling, you'd been doing jiu-jitsu. Was it like a no-brainer from the get-go you wanted to do MMA, or like what were the circumstances that led to that?
Oh yeah, that was the plan, because what I had seen on TV, I was like, I need to head towards this direction. And I kept telling the Tiger Schulman's gym I was at to get me a fight, and they wouldn't do it because, you know, I wasn't, you know, taking enough classes or something like that, or, you know, they gave me a bunch of reasons why. And then I ultimately switched to a gym near my house, which was an LA Boxing. And I became, you know, I started training out of there. And I don't know if you remember this, there was a show on the History Channel called Human Weapon.
Yes.
And so I was actually coached by the big guy, Bill Duff, from that show. He was the gym manager at the time. So Bill Duff actually coached me for my first amateur fight.
Wow.
Yeah. So there's there's a very weird history of not even weird, but more so like a fascinating history of my entire career. Yeah. And then my striking coach, Mike Castro at the time, actually ended up working with Ricardo Almeida. And then that's how I got introduced to Ricardo Almeida and Frankie Edgar. And then, you know, that's how I became, you know, years and years down the road, became a striking coach for some of the, you know, most elite fighters in the game.
Wow, that's really cool. So your amateur debut is in 2009. You have a very strong amateur MMA run. You win an XFE belt before you turned pro. Your amateur career spanned almost exactly 4 years. What was the turning point for you? At what point did it click for you to say, okay, I'm ready to go pro?
So if you look at my record, I was 7-3 as an amateur. Maybe not all the fights are on there, but I was 7-3 as an amateur, and I ended up losing my fifth fight to an undefeated guy named Alex Davidov, and we had an absolute banger of a fight. And I ended up losing a close decision, but that's when I kind of realized, okay, I think I can hang with these guys. And then after that, I actually went up in weight, and I won the next 5 of my amateur fights all at lightweight at 155.
Wow.
So I had the last 2 opponents I beat as a amateur. One of them was an undefeated, I think, Uzbek named Bekbol Baktaybek, who was 3-0, and he was 6'3".
Wow.
And then my last amateur fight, I beat Larry Holmes's nephew, Ryan Holmes, who was 6'1", maybe 6'2", and he was actually a pretty elite wrestler. And I ended up choking him unconscious in like 30 seconds. And so at that point, and it was also, to give you an idea of the interesting history of my combat sports career, my last amateur fight was the first advanced amateur fight in Pennsylvania, where you were allowed to kick with no shin guards, and you were allowed ground and pound to the head.
Wow.
So my first 9 fights were under a very limited rule set. I couldn't punch to the head on the ground, and the majority of my fights were 2-minute rounds. So when I went pro and I ended up losing my professional debut in Bellator, I think a lot of it was just I was not prepared for the jump from 2 to 3 minute rounds to 5-minute rounds. And it was kind of like, you know, and that's what I'm so proud about of my career is like even my losses, they were all, you know, part of the learning curve for me to peak at the time that I am peaking now.
Yeah, exactly. You know, you read my mind. I was just about to ask about that. Losing your pro debut in Bellator. That was November of 2013. Did that impact your confidence at all? Obviously, you had been on a good run in your amateur career.
Oh, I was devastated. I didn't fight for a year after that. I actually, started working full time as a trainer at a gym. I just thought maybe this isn't for me anymore. Like I thought maybe this isn't the way that my life has panned out, and maybe I can. And I was very good at. I am very good at coaching, and I just was starting to do well, making steady paychecks and training lots of clients. And I thought this could be like a career for me. I was looking at becoming the head trainer of an LA Boxing, which ultimately was bought out by UFC. So we were looking at becoming a manager of a UFC gym. I was heading in that direction, and then I ended up fighting again, and then I started winning fights, and it just started taking off after that.
Wow. So yeah, you entered the CFFC in September 2015, your third pro bout. But I have to ask, I saw that at CFFC 61 in October 2016, you had 3 different fights that were canceled on you. What exactly happened there?
Oh my goodness. So if you look at, that was in my experimental run at trying to make 135. I am not a 135er at all. Cannot make. But at the time I was trying, and at the time I possibly could have made it. So the fight before that, I was 140 for the catch weight. And then that fight, I agreed to go to 35. And it was such a grueling camp for about 12 weeks. I had to diet. I was training 2 to 3 times a day on top of running. So I was just drastically overtrained. And I think I lost an opponent 8 weeks out, which is fine. That's normal. But then 2 weeks out, my opponent pulled out with an injury. And then they brought in a new opponent, and then he, quote unquote, broke his hand 3 days before the weigh-ins. So then CFFC brought in a guy to fight me from Canada on 3 days' notice at a catch weight of 140, and then he couldn't make the catch weight. And I guess the athletic commissioner of New Jersey was having a bad day that day, and he canceled my fight, even though I said I was willing to fight him. He was 3 pounds over 140, and I was 139.7, something like that. And that was probably one of the most devastating parts of my career. I remember crying at weigh-ins because I didn't get to fight, because I had put myself through absolute hell trying to make 135. I'll show you a picture. It's not a pretty sight of what I look like at 135, or on the way to 135. And then I think that the weight cut was so brutal on me that a week later I was lifting weights and I herniated a disc in my neck, and I ended up losing all the strength in my left arm. And I had to learn how to do a push-up again. I had to learn how to do a pull-up again. I would lay in bed and I had to keep my arm over my head, because if I let it hang, the nerve pulled on my neck. And lying in bed, my pain was at a 9 out of 10 on the pain scale.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. So I actually, the doctor recommended I get spinal fusion, and said, your fighting career is done. And I, went and got multiple opinions, and I ended up rehabbing it over the course of about a year. And then that was kind of when I started my first serious run in professional, beating Adley Edwards after that, who ended up being, undefeated until he fought Aaron Pico in Bellator. Beat Chris Humes Mitchell after that. He was undefeated. And that was the guy who I broke his orbital bone, and he never fought again. And then a month later, I ended up fighting a college. I don't know if he was an All-American, but he was a very good wrestler named Jared Mercado, who was, I think at the time I was 5-2, and he was 15-6. So it was a very big step up in competition. And, oh man, I wish I could find the tape from that fight. The second the bell rings in the first round, I sprinted across the cage and I flying kneed him in the face.
Wow.
And it landed kind of on his chest and on his chin. It was basically like the Jorge Masvidal knockout, but it 3 seconds faster. And if I dropped him, but I didn't knock him out. And if I had knocked him out, I would have the fastest knockout in MMA history. By the time I hit him, the clock said 4:59. It would have been a 1 second knockout.
Wow.
Yeah.
Instant.
But I ended up getting held down for the rest of the round, and then I ninja choked him in the second. So it's still
so either way, yeah. Either way,
well for me.
So yeah, talking about your early pro career, you had some momentum. You put together a 4-fight win streak, and you ended up challenging for the Maverick MMA featherweight title. That was May in 2018. You lost a decision against Scott Heckman. Yeah. And then you had a comeback fight in CFFC. You've been in and out of CFFC over the years, haven't you?
Yeah. And I mean, and I think that CFFC did see me as a prospect still at that point. I think I was 6-3, and then they put me against a guy who was 6-4, who on paper I was expected to beat, and then he came in. Boy McCormo came in overweight, and I know that's not that big of a deal in America, but I know it's how big of a deal it is in Japan and in RIZIN in particular, which I personally love because I've never missed weight in my entire career. And I remember when we locked up on the cage, I could feel every bit of the extra weight on him. And I ended up, getting upset in that fight. And then, yeah, it just felt like, CFFC was trying to build my momentum back against guys that I should beat. And the fights were just not going the way that I should have. And I just feel like after losing to Scott Heckman, it really did like a damage to me, like in my confidence. And it took like losing the Ring of Combat title fight against Tim Dooling, the first time I've ever been submitted in my career, to really like reassess, especially at the time of the pandemic, when the pandemic hit and I was, I remember this specifically. I had I had like $100-something in my checking account. And I didn't have a job anymore because all the gyms were closed. I was 7-5. And then I remember getting an opportunity to go coach in the UFC. And then I remember I brought all my physicals and all my paperwork in case they needed a featherweight on short notice. I came in 10 pounds within weight. And
Wow.
on a card where there were 6 featherweights, and one of them fell off, and I almost ended up fighting Giga Chikadze on a week's notice. And they couldn't sign me because I was coming off a loss, and I was 7-5. If I was 8-4, they would have let me fight Giga Chikadze. And I remember crying on the airplane home, thinking I hated everything about my life at that point because, I spent so much of my career not prioritizing my own career, prioritizing my friends who were in the UFC, helping guys like Paul Felder, Sean Brady, and in camps where I'm supposed to be focusing on myself. Like when I fought a guy named Mike Lawrence a week before the fight, I'm holding pads for Marlon Moraes when he's getting ready to fight Henry Cejudo. So it's in retrospect, I realized how much damage I did to my early career in terms of not focusing on myself. But, in retrospect, I wouldn't take anything back because of the position I'm in now. And I'm very proud of like the adversity that I've dealt with and I put myself through to get to where I am now. Cause I think my story is definitely a little bit of an anomaly for who I am, the age I'm at, and what I'm doing at this age in particular.
Yeah, absolutely. And you said all of that, like what you just mentioned about, having the chance to fight Giga and holding pads for Marlon. Was that by the time the pandemic came around? Was that in 2020?
So the opportunity to fight Giga was on one of the like the bubble fights. So and I was holding pads for Marlon probably in like 2019, 2018. The first time I ever got to corner in a UFC event, I cornered Marlon Moraes in Fortaleza, Brazil against Rafael Assunção.
Wow.
Yeah. So, and he was just like, come corner me in my main event fight. And I was like, what? Okay. So that was pretty intense. So,
Yeah. No, that's really cool. I read that by 2020, you'd already cornered over 100 fights, including, like you mentioned, Marlon, Frankie, Claudia Gadelia, Eubanks, so many different fighters.
And then in addition to cornering, a lot of like amateur fighters through my gym, my teammates, because I actually started cornering my teammates the same time I started fighting in 2009. So, and then, cornering a lot of my students from the gym and things like that. When I was working at Royal Striking in Philadelphia with my coach, Aaron Meisner at the time, we cornered a lot of our fighters together. So it all kind of like, it all kind of came to fruition in particular from a coaching standpoint when, Mark Henry couldn't make it to Corey Anderson's title fight in the PFL in Dubai last year, and basically said, all right, you're leading from a striking standpoint as my striking coach, like go. And then it was like, all right, here we go. And then I went in there and I was the head striking coach for Corey Anderson when he won the PFL light heavyweight title. And I didn't feel out of place. I was like, I deserve to be here and I have the skill to be here and to say the right things to you. And watching the replay and calling the things that I'm calling for Corey Anderson to do, and he's doing them. It was like playing a video game. And it was just really, really fulfilling and rewarding to once again, not only do that at this age, but also right after I, kind of like rectified my entire career winning the CFFC title a few months before that.
Wow. Incredible. And you mentioned a gym in Philadelphia or Pennsylvania, I believe. You've had various affiliations over the years. Can you just kind of walk me through each of the gyms you've been with? You mentioned like LA Boxing. I
Okay.
believe Nick was one of them.
Yeah. So my career started, I tried at Tiger Schulman's gym, and that's where I developed like my ground, fundamentals there. And then I started training at an LA Boxing in Cherry Hill, New Jersey, which is where I'm born and raised. And then that LA Boxing became a UFC gym. And then years later, like almost a decade later, we disenfranchised from that gym, and now it's called TKO Fitness. It's our own gym. And I started there as a member in 2009, and I'm a part owner currently.
Wow.
Yeah. And then in addition to that, I trained under, basically the Iron Army affiliation, which is Frankie Edgar's affiliation. It's kind of like all under the Renzo Gracie banner. So like I would train with Frankie and all of them at Ricardo Almeida's jiu-jitsu school, which was about 40 minutes from me, which was affiliated with Nick Catone MMA, which is affiliated with the Iron Army and Frankie Edgar's gym. And then that was affiliated with Renzo Gracie Philadelphia, which was run by Daniel Gracie, which is where I trained with a lot of the Philly guys, because, it would take me an hour and 15 minutes to get to the Jersey Shore to train with Frankie, but it would take me 20 minutes to go train with Paul Felder and Jonathan Webb and Sean Brady. So a lot of my amateur early days and my early pro career was done in Philadelphia with those guys. So I'm definitely I'm all over the place. So in the sense of like the East Coast, like I train, to give you an idea, last week I trained at Nick Catone MMA in Brick, New Jersey, which is an hour and 15 minutes from my house. And then I also trained at TKO Fitness, and then I trained at Marquez MMA, which is 12 minutes from my house. And then I went and hit pads at Chalk-D Muay Thai Academy in Delaware, which is an hour from my house. So like I'm all over the tri-state area.
Wow.
Just go wherever I can to get the best training that's necessary for my career. I'm definitely I've been driving a Prius since 2009, and I have continued to drive Priuses, and I will probably drive Priuses until the day I
die. Wow, that's really cool. So yeah, we just touched on your coaching career as well, and from 2021 to 2023 was when your career as a fighter was sort of rebuilt. You won 3 fights. You came back into the CFFC. You won and lost the Art of War featherweight title, like you mentioned earlier. And then in September 2024, your fight against Justin Patton ended in a no contest due to an accidental eye poke. But then your real breakthrough came in 2025. That was your first championship opportunity in CFFC. Is that right?
Yes. That Justin Patton fight was so frustrating for me, because I had made so many improvements and so many leaps and bounds in that training camp in particular. And I got paid I think I got paid like $900 for that fight. And it was really bad money. I spent, almost double that just trying to get Airbnbs to Pittsburgh and bringing out coaches and all that. Like it was a fight exclusively because I thought it was a good matchup to take against a hometown kid in his hometown, because I wanted to prove something to myself after losing the Art of War title. And then in a fight that I thought I was dominating for 2 minutes, and then I poked him in the eye, and it was just so frustrating to be like, to do everything right and then to have an outcome of no contest where you don't even get your win money.
Wow.
Yeah. So again, and then after that fight, my son was born. And then, a lot of people say like, I don't know what happened after that, but you have dad strength now or something, because if you look at that, before that, I've had like a TKO here and there in my career, but then 2 knockouts in 1 year, and then upsetting the undefeated Anthony Delemy at the time to win the CFFC title. That 2025 will always be special to me, because it was the year, like I said, that I really cemented like satisfaction in my career. And I've said this before, that before that year, before 2025, I was not happy with the way my MMA career had went. And if I had died the next day, I wouldn't be happy. And after I won the CFFC title and defended in December, I thought, like, if I died tomorrow, I'd be okay. Everything else is the cherry on top. And then all of a sudden I got the call up to RIZIN. So now I'm like, all right, never mind. Restart.
There's still a lot more to go. Yeah.
Yeah. Can't die now.
Wow. And so, yeah, I read that for that fight against Anthony Delemy, like the predictions online, most people were picking Anthony to win that fight. I guess, did that give you any added motivation, or did you not pay attention to that?
I don't know. I had looked, I used to like go on Tapology and websites like that. And, my heart rate would go up if I saw something like that. And then the exact numbers, I think it was 98% of people thought I was going to lose that fight.
Wow.
And I remembered for like the first time in my career, when I saw a number like that, instead of being like, oh my God, I'm going to lose, I was like, all right, bring it. Like, good. And it's so funny too, because I was such a heavy underdog in that fight. And it was the most confident I've ever been going into a fight because my preparation was so good. And like I was stopping sparring partners in the gym. Not with, one thing I'm proud of is I don't really ever drop anybody with a strike to the head. So like, but I was melting people in the gym in 2 rounds. Like they could not withstand my pace. And I just thought there's nobody on this planet on that night that is going to be able to maintain a pace with me for 4 rounds, let alone 5. And I shut him down with a game plan that really I don't think anybody saw coming based on, what you would see about me being the relatively well-known striking coach. And I went out there and I just ragdolled him on the ground for 4 rounds.
Wow. And so after that win against Dilem, you defended the belt, right? In a rematch against Justin Patton.
Yeah.
Tell me more about that.
That was vindicating for me as well, because, it was just one of those things where I feel like a lot of people, I heard Justin's teammates sort of commenting on my social media saying like, you guys need to run this back for the belt. You guys have unfinished business. And Justin Patton had just recently made his debut in CFFC and won. And, I wasn't going to, I think maybe a couple of people thought I'd be like, oh, Justin's not worth my time. I'll try to big man him. But instead I was like, yes, let's rebook this. We need to finish this right now. And it was funny too, because after we had fought the first time, I had posted something on social media that said like, Justin, all respect to Justin, we will run this back next year in some way, shape, or form. And then it all just came to fruition for the CFFC title. And it was a fight that I was really proud of, because when I lost the Art of War title, I didn't really take my opponent seriously. He was, a 500 fighter. And then it just the perfect storm of things happened. I wasn't doing the extra cardio I was supposed to be doing. I wasn't, locked in the gym. I was kind of going through the motions. And then I got sick on fight week. And then I still ended up only losing a split decision to him and to lose the Art of War title. And it was weird because I kind of had like the same feeling in my gut going into the Patton fight. I wasn't excited about it in particular. I wasn't that motivated, but I just remember being like, if you go into this with the same lack of intensity, you're going to lose this fight. And that fight camp wasn't motivation. It was just straight discipline. I didn't want to do anything, but I got up and ran every day that I was supposed to. And I did all the training that I was supposed to. And it paid off in flying colors when I scored a first round knockout.
No, that's brilliant. And can you remind me again, at what point of your career was your child born?
In between it was after the no contest to Patton and before I started my run in CFFC again against Ricardo Fuentes.
And I see. And like you mentioned, you said like people were saying you had dad strength, but outside of training, how has that changed your life? I know a lot of fighters when they become a father or when they become a parent, they say it changes so many things for them.
Yeah, it's definitely changed a lot for me. I don't know necessarily about like my routine, because my wife is so supportive. She knows when it's time for me to lock in for a fight camp. That she kind of bears the weight of being a parent a lot more than I do. Which is, it's frustrating for me and it's upsetting sometimes because, I feel like there are times where I'm missing out on my son's life to go train. But I'm also, I'm providing for my family now, like my wife is a full-time stay-at-home mother and I'm the breadwinner. So I gotta, she understands that like, hey, if I got to go out there and train a lot to make sure that I can get these opportunities, that's what she has to do. So, but in terms of like what has changed in particular, I can't goof off after training. It used to be like, oh, good training. You want to go get lunch with the boys and hang out and do all this stuff. It's like, no, I have to compartmentalize my training and I have to do it with intent. Otherwise I've wasted an hour that I'm not spending with my family. So if anything, my training has become less available, but more focused. And I feel like because of that, I feel like I don't have the ability to overdo things anymore. And I think overtraining plagued my early career a lot in fights where I felt like I was so concerned about losing a fight that I would overtrain and go into a fight flat. And I feel like with my child here, I don't really have the opportunity to do that as well because I'm so pressed for time.
Big change indeed.
Yeah.
So after your rematch against Justin Patton, getting the first round TKO, how soon after that did you get the call to fight in RIZIN?
So I was at kind of like a bit of a crossroads after I won the Patton fight because, you know, I thought I was going to get calls from all sorts of big organizations. And, you know, my manager, Brian Butler, was, you know, saying he put my name out to a couple different organizations, and I just wasn't really getting any bites. And I was starting to get to the point where I was like, well, if nobody's going to call me, you know, I'm going to stay in the best shape of my life for about 6 months. And then if nobody's going to call me, then let's just go defend the CFFC title and then walk off into the sunset, because I can rest my hat knowing, you know, that I was an elite fighter, and maybe I didn't give myself the opportunity because I peaked too late, but I was okay with that. And I was coming to terms with that. And then I remember I was offered a UFC veteran. I was offered a Contender Series veteran. One of them turned me down. The other one had contractual issues, so he couldn't fight me. And then I got the flu. And so then I was supposed to fight on the CFFC card tonight in April.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. And that was where I was going to defend my title for the last time, realistically. And then I was like, I'm going to pull out of this card because, you know, I'm not going to half-ass this after being sick. You know, this was about probably a month and change ago. But, you know, I take my fight camps very, very seriously at this point, especially with the elite fighters that CFFC was bringing in to fight for the title. So then I was kind of sort of recollecting myself in terms of like, all right, I'll fight again in the summer or maybe the fall, and we'll go from there. And then a Monday morning, maybe a month ago now, Brian Butler called me and said, hey, RIZIN's calling. You're in. And I was like, I started shaking. I was like, what? Like, oh. And I remember like I kind of like was like shaking, and there were like tears in my eyes, telling my wife like, I'm being asked to fight in RIZIN. Like, this is insane. I had accepted. Brian Butler was like, do you want to know about your opponent? I was like, I don't care. Like, let's go. So I had accepted before I even knew I was fighting Kiyomi Matsushima. So it was just such a exciting and validating, you know, moment for my career that I feel like all of my hard work has finally come to fruition for an organization that actually appreciates my value and my skill as a fighter and doesn't look at me from a statistics standpoint as just numbers on a paper in terms of my age, in terms of my record. And I feel like I am now obligated to show my true skill and what I'm capable of in RIZIN in May.
Wonderful. Wow, that's truly, yeah. So many fighters say that when they get the call, like it's a life-changing moment. Obviously, many fighters grew up watching Pride, and they say it's a dream come true. So now that you know the name was on the contract, Kiyomi Matsushima, have you been able to do any film study on him? What is your impression of him overall?
Oh yeah, I've watched all of his tape. So I feel like he's actually one of the more well-rounded fighters that I've seen out of Japan. I feel like he's got a very tricky style because he does switch stances. He fights orthodox, he fights southpaw. He's got weapons from both. He's got world title shot experience fighting one championship against Martin Nguyen. And his style has adapted and modified as I've watched his career go on. Like I went back and watched him fight one of my friends, Isao Kobayashi, back in, I think. So I've been watching his career for a very, very long time now in terms of like, you know, recently. And I studied everything from the first fight I could find to his most recent fights in Knockout. In the I'm confused on the rule set there, but interesting. But I've been watching those as well to try to get a good feel for what his striking is like and for what his grappling is like. And I think he's it's weird. He's like the Japanese version of me, essentially. Like, he's 33, I'm 36, I'm 14-6, he's 15-7 with 10 finishes. I have 11 finishes. It's like he's 5'7", I'm 5'8". Like, we are basically each other from a different country in the sense of like I was actually very surprised that I was, you know, I honestly expected when I got the call to RIZIN I was going to be thrown to the wolves. I thought I was going to have to fight the guy that fought Patchy Mix, and I remember I was just like, please not him, please not him. And then but so then when I got offered Matsushima, I was actually taken aback. I was like, wow, this is like going to be a very competitive matchup in reality and on paper. So I was actually pleasantly surprised to be offered a matchup like that for my debut in RIZIN.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I guess you know, when you watch the fight, when you watched his footage and considering your own skill set, how do you see the matchup? I guess how do you envision the fight going?
I feel like our styles are going to cancel each other out in an exciting way. Like I feel like our styles are going to neutralize each other's ability to do something boring. Like I feel like my takedown defense will neutralize his ability to hold me on the ground. I feel like his movement is going to neutralize my ability to smother him, especially because there's no cage. And when I won the CFFC title, some of my best work in that fight was against the cage, using smother and cage pressure that some fans found boring. But fighting in the ring, there is no opportunity to do that, or a significantly, less opportunity. So I feel like both of our comfort zones, in a sense, are not going to be available. So I think we're both going to be in almost like a panic mode for 15 minutes. Not in a sloppy way, but in a sense of like, there is no place where we can rest. So I think this is just going to force an insane fight.
And you mentioned earlier, like you were watching his fights under the knockout banner. So the rules, it's called like unlimited rules. Basically, you can take your opponent down, but on the ground, there's really no submissions. It's just ground and pound. So it allows those fighters with an MMA background to kind of use their wrestling, but kind of keep that entertaining aspect of just striking only.
Okay, that makes sense. It also kind of was like a little ridiculous because he's fighting kickboxers that don't have MMA experience.
Yeah.
And it's like, of course you look like an of course you look like an Olympian wrestler when you're taking down a kickboxer who's pulling half guard on the feet. I was like, what am I watching? So, and I mean, like, if you look at it, it's like, wow, you might think Matsushima's got amazing takedowns. It's like, yeah, against a guy who can't wrestle. So again, I feel like, if he thinks he can take me down and hold me down and grind out a decision, Sabatello style, it's not happening. It's not happening. So I'm going to be in his face for 15 minutes. And it's not like a disrespect thing, but like with the amount of attention I've garnered from the Japanese fans already, I have put a massive amount of pressure on myself to perform. And so I don't have the option to go out there and win a grindy, boring fight. Maybe if I didn't say a word on social media leading up to this fight, and I could have just, snuck under the radar. It's just like the random, the unknown foreign fighter. But that's just not my style. And I just wanted to, introduce myself. And now I've been telling people, like, with the amount of feedback and the support I've gotten from the Japanese fans, I owe you guys an exciting fight, and you're going to get one.
Yeah, there's many events that have been announced for the remainder of 2026. We're expected to do an event every month for the rest of the year. Assuming you win this fight, you come out healthy. How busy would you like to be this year?
I would like to be very busy. If I could, I would, I would turn around and fight. So what's now April? So if I could fight again in July or August, and then if I could fight again on the New Year's card, that would be like the dream year for me. Fighting in RIZIN would be this card where I really make my name known at the G Lion Arena. And then I just wanted to just escalate from there. Put me on a bigger card with a bigger name, and then put me on the biggest card of the year at some mega dome or mega arena or something like that in front of 30, 40,000 fans. That would be like the highlight of my career and my life. So aside from my child being born.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. Yeah. We'll keep that on the DL. Don't worry.
Of course.
Yeah. So I wanted to ask, obviously you mentioned that when you agreed to the fight, you didn't even care about who the opponent was. And as an accomplished, champion in America coming over to Japan, you were joking and you said you didn't want to fight the guy that fought Patchy, but eventually, assuming you win this fight and you stay busy in 2026, you are going to climb that ladder and face some of the guys in the deeper end. Many fighters who come into RIZIN, like Patchy when he came in, he said he had his eyes on the champion, Rajabali Shadalayev, who is unbeaten, finished all of his fights. Are you coming in and, of course, you have your eyes. I would imagine you have your eyes on the title, but is that something that you want to take your time towards, or do you want to climb the ranks quickly?
I would like to. I would like to do it appropriately, but also I understand where I am with my age, so I don't have the I don't have the pleasure of taking my sweet time, if that makes sense. I wouldn't
Mhm.
mind, another fight or two against, steady and stiff competition, but no steps backwards. I don't want to.
Mhm.
I want to fight. Like I talked about fighting. His name is. Why am I drawing a blank on his name? He's known as Lightning. Um, he's dealing with a hand injury.
Oh yeah, Chihiro Suzuki.
Yeah, Chihiro Suzuki. So
Mhm.
I would love to fight Chihiro Suzuki, but I would like to fight him once he's back on a winning streak, once he is not having hand issues. I want it to
Mhm.
be a good fight, not I don't want to fight a shell of what Chihiro Suzuki was. So
Mhm. Mhm.
as long as the fans want to see the fights and as long as the fights make sense in sending me towards the title, those are the fights that I want.
That makes sense. Yeah, of course, Chihiro Suzuki, a former champion, but like you mentioned, on a bit of a losing skid right now, and hopefully we'll be able to make a return soon
Yeah.
after coming off his injuries.
But
So,
just think about that, like Japanese Thunder versus, Japanese Lightning versus Korean Thunder. It would like the buildup would be awesome. So
oh yeah, it's a match
I
made in heaven.
that's why I said that was like my dream fight when asked who I
Mhm.
would want to fight in RIZIN.
Mhm. No, I think the fans are very excited to hear that. Well, listen, Ryan, I don't want to take up too much of your time. You've given some lovely answers, some brilliant details. Do you have a message to Koyomi Matsushima?
Um, I know he's a quiet individual, and I know he doesn't use social media much. So I assume all he's doing with his time is training, and so I am taking him as seriously as any opponent I've ever taken in my career, and I hope he's bringing the best version of himself because I'm bringing the best version of myself, and whether you like it or not, we're going to have an exciting fight. So buckle up.
And then lastly, a message to the Ryzen fans in Japan and around the world.
Yeah, thank you so much for the outpouring of support. It's been unlike anything I ever could have imagined. And the way that the Japanese fans treat me, and the way that they've been so supportive of me, and I haven't even set foot in the ring yet. It just makes me wonder, like, what have I been wasting my time in America for? Why would I ever come back to fight in America when you have a bunch of drunk Twitter fingers calling me a bum or calling me old and stuff like that? So it's like, you guys don't deserve me. Japan deserves me. So it's like I can't wait to go home to Japan where I belong.
Wonderful. Well, very, very well said. Ryan, thank you so much for the time. Get some rest, and I'm looking forward to meeting you on Fight Week.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate your time.
Absolutely. Take care.
Take care.